What's up, y'all? It's your boy Eddie Rivera, also known as Smooth E, and you are listening to the first official episode of Certified Adult, I guess, podcast. Now, before we get into the podcast and what it's about, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and why you're going to be listening to this podcast and who gives me the validation to speak on it. Now, I'm no expert. I'm no therapist. I don't have all the answers. I'm going to just get that out the way first and foremost. But I am a late 20-something from the New York City metro area that's also a media professional that has a little bit of experience acting, doing background work, working for a national news television show. So I've got a little knowledge of what's going on. But most importantly, I'm an adult trying to figure it out just like you. Now, whether you are 22 listening to this podcast, 35 listening to this podcast, or anything inside, outside that realm, just to give a lending ear, I appreciate you being here, and hopefully you stick around. So, getting into the podcast, I feel like at this age, we all try to figure out what's going on or act like we know everything. And truth be told, we don't. How we start every episode with the Certified Adult, I guess, podcast is with a definition. So being that it's in the title, I figured today's definition should be certified, which is defined as having earned a certificate or being officially recognized for competence in a specific area. But when does that certificate come in? Is it college, when we walk across the graduation stage? But then what if we're still lacking knowledge, which we all are in many different realms? Or is it when we get married? But then what about divorce and failed relationships? Or maybe it's that big business idea that you have that you feel, oh, I'm going to make millions off of, but then you go bankrupt. All this to say, none of us have all the answers and we're all trying to figure it out. But how many times have you went through something and feel like you're alone, can't talk to anybody, or nobody's going through the same struggle and it's only me? I've been there. I'm sure you've been there. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it a little bit further. Whether it's a friend that may be going through a similar thing or somebody on the other side of the country that's going through the exact same thing, just in a different font. Whatever it may be, we all live this adulting life and we're all trying to figure it out. And let's face it, times aren't great right now. Not that they're usually ever, but here we are and we're trying to figure this out with a lot going on in our lives. Speaking to that, that's what brought me to doing this podcast. It took a lot of strength, a lot of bravery, a lot of throwaways, a lot of questioning, a lot of things that has held this podcast up from being shot for many years. The first time I considered doing this podcast was with two great friends. I'll give them a shout out. Harry and Mark. Harry no longer being with us, but is in the pandemic when everyone was starting a podcast, and we all went to school together, lived together for a few years, and thought of how do we make our voice heard. I was the one with the media background. Those two are people that I've always leaned on for life advice and conversations, and vice versa. They would, always talk to me as well. And we always had the idea of, okay, let's put something out. We always joked that we should just film our college lives and have that be a show. Then upon graduating, we figured, okay, well, the podcast makes sense. Everyone's remote, everyone's dealing with COVID and trying to figure that out. We were just never able to land on something. We went through different avenues, different names. We shot pre-shows and never were able to fall on that one perfect idea. And then unfortunately, one September day in 2021, we lost our great friend Harry. And it was unexpected. He was a couple of months away from turning 25. And, I feel like that's where you become an adult. They always talk about your frontal lobe being fully developed. And I think that the three of us were always very wise. And, it's a shame that Harry didn't get to live out what it means to be an adult and really figure that out, even though we were in the process of it. And Mark and I are still like this, but I think that this podcast will serve as a way to carry on that tradition and carry on that conversation that we had started many years ago. You never know what life is going to throw at you, and you try to figure out, okay, how do I do this or how do I do that? And maybe you don't have anybody that's very reliable or the resources that are very reliable. Maybe it's a parent that can lend you an ear, but they don't think of things the same way that you do. Or it's just a generational thing and they can't understand it. Or if it's a sibling that has totally different ideologies than you, that they can't understand your standpoint, or the younger generation just doesn't have as much experience yet. So this is what this podcast is for, to be able to be there for one another and have these conversations that, oh man, I didn't think of it that way, but because I'm listening to it this way, now it sparks the idea in my head of how to change my narrative or think a bit a different way, or know that you're not alone in this. We may deal with different things, we may deal with the same things, but all in all, main theme, we are all trying to adult the proper way. And there's no one answer to what that is. This podcast is made to be a vessel of celebrations, thoughts, questions, conversations, whatever it may be around the adulting space. Think about the last time you had an in-deep conversation with a friend of your age group and how it just went on for hours and you're thinking about the same things. This is what that podcast is for. And I know that there's tons of podcasts out there that you can listen to. Some you may enjoy more than others. But this isn't a podcast to just entertain or belittle anybody else with the conversations that we have. By no means is this a podcast to give you all the answers. That would be unfair to you. That'd be unfair to myself. I'm in this too. I felt being alone. I felt not being understood. I felt like there's nobody else that's going through what I'm going through, until I had a conversation with a friend and it was like, oh, you're going through the same thing I am, just in a different way. Or, oh, I actually dealt with that. Here's how I dealt with it. And again, I'm no expert. I may be the therapist friend. I may be the friend that everyone talks to, but I'm no expert in this by any means. And that's what the podcast is for. Let's all explore what being an adult is together. All right, so I've said enough. We've had this conversation. I've told you what it's about. Let's put some action to it. Let's figure out how we can move forward and be better adults. First and foremost, this is a very interactive podcast. A few years ago on Instagram, I had put up a post for 25 to 35-year-olds asking, what interests you? What are things you think about on a daily basis? What are questions you have about life? What's your favorite topics to discuss with friends? And I got a pretty large response from that. People gave very vast ideas and stuff specific to who they are as a person. Some of the ideas were the same: love, finances, family life. And those are things that we'll discuss on this podcast. I don't want to give away too much, but we'll definitely open up the conversations to grief and what it's like to lose somebody unexpectedly, and finances. How do I build a proper budget? Love life. When am I going to find love? What does a real love look like? Friendship. Who's a real friend? And we'll continue to have these conversations. A lot of them will be with just me. Some of them will be with recurring hosts. Others may be with somebody who I've deemed successful, the public deemed successful. There'll be plenty of opportunities to submit questions, to submit topics that you want to hear on this show, and have come in and have conversations about, oh, I think about this way, but how do my fellow adults think about it? Now it's your turn. I'm giving you a little bit of homework. Have the conversation with your friends. What topics are you discussing? What are you most interested in life? What do you have questions about? Tell a friend to tell a friend about the podcast, because we can all get something from this. You got this far, you might as well give a lending ear and share to someone else that maybe they could use this. For now, that's it. Make sure to follow the socials, Certified Adult I Guess Podcast on Instagram. You can listen to it wherever you get your podcast, and stay tuned for the next and following episodes. Peace, y'all.